Recording in progress. Okay, there's, I think, one new person here. Alex, I don't think you've been here before, so I don't know if you read the landing page. The conceit of the meetup is that it's 1882, and we have been given this book by a friend, and we may know prior stuff that Nietzsche wrote, but we don't know anything about what's coming up or any critical analysis of Nietzsche after 1882. It's okay to bring up anything prior, Hegel, Locke, Plato, whomever. And but the idea is to approach this with a beginner's mind and think for ourselves about the aphorisms individually. So that's where we're at. Okay, so we are on, hold it, I gotta pull up the page here. There it is. Aphorism 55, and we'll be finishing book one today, and maybe we'll just take stock a little bit. Okay, before we go any further, the holiday season is coming up, and I think it's probably a good idea to skip next week. I'm sort of reluctant to skip it all, but even I may be doing something on Wednesday. I know there's some, whatever. So we're going to skip next Wednesday. And 2 weeks from today, we'll be back again. And then somewhere around Christmas, we'll negotiate what we're going to do. Take the Christmas and New Year's week off or plow through it all, depend on Wednesday, December 25th is a Wednesday, I do believe, yeah. And so we will be, and New Year's Day. Yeah, we're going to skip both of those.
Yeah, because it's on the same
Yeah.
day.
So just have that in mind along the way. All right. So we're going to start with 55, the ultimate noble-mindedness. And I found this aphorism very challenging, and I just haven't quite come to a definitive conclusion. And I know there's a reference in the Kaufman book to Aphorism 76. I did not read it on purpose because we're not supposed to be there. So I don't know if any of you did, and that's okay if you did. It's just, that's my own little personal thing here. So he seems to be talking about nobility because we've already had, I think it's aphorism 4 or 5, or I think it's 3 actually, a definition kind of what a noble person does. And he's kind of repeating that here. But then in the end, to become the advocate of the rule, which I think is just sort of the status quo, that might be the ultimate form and refinement in which noble-mindedness reveals itself on earth. And the noble person, and the other thing I found interesting is that noble is in quotes in the first sentence, and then it's not quoted later on. And he's done this definition of the noble person thinks differently, sees different things, and stands apart from the crowd. But nobility is recognized by the herd by its rarity and selflessness, apparent selflessness. Audrey.
I think that's the way, I found it very challenging as well. First of all, I just want to tell you that I won't be here on the 4th. So if we skip next week, so that's 2 weeks. So I'll just try and keep up with the reading because I have a doctor's appointment I can't cancel. So so with this one, the feeling of heat in things that feel cold to everybody else, but that really started me thinking that why noble, maybe noble was to show us that when he talks about, remember your history, I think this is the one where he says, remember something. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm getting this mixed. Offering sacrifices on altars that are dedicated to unknown gods, a courage without any desire for honors. These all sound like interesting things to me. But that there's a rarity and a lack of awareness of this rarity that makes the person noble. So I really didn't understand what that meant. Up to then, hitherto, it was a rarity. Is he saying it's not a rarity anymore? Or that maybe what is noble, based on your definition, what you were just talking about, changes depending on the culture. And so it might be good, it might be bad, but it's always going to be some kind of a rarity. I don't know. It was very confusing.
Yeah, I took that it was a rarity and lack of awareness of this rarity that made a person noble. And I tried to think of, I'm not going to be able to come up with an actual person, but a noble, what we might just commonly think, and that's what I mean. I think what he means by hitherto. In a way, he's sort of toying with the idea that before this aphorism, a noble person was respected and for their gravity and their wisdom and their like Mother Teresa, let's say. I think we would cast Mother Teresa as having a kind of nobility to be doing what she's doing with her life. Martin Luther King might be considered a noble person under this standard of rarity and what was the other thing? Let's see here. Rarity and lack of awareness of this rarity, because these people, Martin Luther King may not have been aware. Maybe that's a bad example. But I think Mother Teresa might be a good example, or somebody like Mother Teresa, who is giving up her life in a way that none of us would ever do. And this reflects back to aphorism 3, where he makes a distinction that the common people find it rare that a noble person does something without seeking their own advantage. And I think that I don't know that he's attacking that. I think he's trying to spin it a little bit. And I think that he identifies himself as one of these noble people because of that prior description. Has values for which there are no scales, all that sort of stuff. Jason.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr. or even Nietzsche would be the good example for his definition of noble-mindedness. And I think the reason we got confused is the sentence he talking about certainly. He talked about perhaps nobody is more consistently selfish than those who are noble. So selfish is a good word for Nietzsche, I think. Okay, so in a way you had to think about Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr. or Nietzsche are selfish, which is good. And the definition is here in the middle of the paragraph. Okay, so it involves the use of a real and a singular standard and almost madness, right? Think about Nietzsche, think about Mother Teresa, think about Martin Luther King Jr. They are sort of mad, okay? The feeling of heat of sin that feel cold to everybody else, right? He feel the heat, but other people feel cold, right? Deducing something unusual. The discovery of value for which no scale have been invented yet. They are inventing new. They are forerunner. They something nobody did before. offering sacrifice on altars that are dedicated to an unknown God, right? Martin Luther King, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, they sort of religious like, and they self-sacrifice, and what's their God? We don't know. A courage without any desire for honor. Okay, question mark. Self-sufficiency that overflow and give to men and things. So in a way, this behavior is very selfish. Let's put it this way. But that's noble. I think that's what he want to say. Thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess I might be thinking of selfish in different terms, a different spin than the way I think you are applying it here. The part of that I found interesting and highlighted was a courage without any desire for honors, a self-sufficiency that overflows and gives to men and things. I think that is an appropriately applied to Martin Luther King, the people that we were just mentioning. But I'm not convinced that the prior stuff applies. So it's kind of an oddly mixed bag. Barbara.
Well, what's interesting here is that he talks about the exceptionalism of somebody who's noble, right? And at the end, he says their self-sufficiency overflows and communicates to other people. So it's not that they intend to influence people, it's just that their internal integrity is so great that it flows out of them into the public sphere and influences people. So good enough. But the last part of this, he says, note it was by means of this standard. So this standard, I take it, means the standard that we're measuring the exceptional man, the noble man by,
Right.
is inequitably judged and on the whole slandered in favor of the exception. So the rule of humanity, in other words, the normal people or the people who follow the rules, they were by comparison, his word is slandered, his word is inequitably judged in my translation. So he's saying that because you have this high standard, regular people don't come up to it, and in some way they're judged because they don't. And then his last sentence is to become the advocate of the rule, which is the advocate of the normalcy, or in other words, to promote normalcy, to be a regular guy. That might be the ultimate form and refinement in which noble-mindedness manifests itself on earth. So he's saying that at least this is what it looks like to me, that regular people have a nobility in them that is actually more true or more valuable than the exceptionalism of the quote unquote noble man. He's saying that it's too bad that regular people are judged harshly by this very high standard when it says that the ultimate form and refinement is them, of nobility is really in them. Now, I don't get that, honestly, because he's always banging on about how much he likes exceptional people. And here he seems to be saying, well, regular people actually are noble. And what about that? So this confused me too.
Okay, so where I went with this, when I made the distinction in the beginning, when I first said it, he begins talking about what nobility is. And then in the end, he talks about noble-mindedness. And I don't think he's attributing the nobility in the way I don't think he thinks of the common people as noble, but noble mind. And again, this is
Noble-mindedness. Okay. All right.
no,
That's interesting. Yeah.
well, that's how I kind of worked it out. as I worked my way through this, trying to make sense of it all, I realized there was a very big distinction there. He's not saying that they're noble, but they have noble, and maybe the ultimate noble-mindedness might just be status quo, because you can't just upend society all the time. There has to be a certain, what I think he sort of favors is the remarkable individual who will pop up in the midst of the status quo.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where the noble person is, nobility, presumptively. Anyway, I know Fred will have something interesting to add. Fred.
No, not too interesting. I was just going to say kind of the same thing that Barbara is. For me, the last sentence is what puzzled me because it seems to be contrary to the intent of both 55 and what he said before about nobility. And needless to say, I take the exact opposite perspective on what he considers noble, his personal notion of noble, as distinguished from what the common notion of noble that other people might have. For for Nietzsche, his notion of the noble person, one reads this and his earlier definition of nobility, is that they set themselves apart from common morality and common standards. They make their own rules, in other words. They're the master in a master-slave relationship. As it says here, they're consistently selfish. So I just don't get it, because for me, his notion of nobility, both here and earlier, would be the exact opposite of somebody like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa. Is Mother Teresa more consistently selfish? The most consistently selfish person? I mean, I don't know. Isn't she the most consistently selfless person in one of the most consistently selfless persons in history? Same with Martin Luther King, gave his life for his cause, and a good cause. Isn't that the exact opposite of what he's saying here? But I must be off the mark, because I totally am the opposite of what other people say. But I do find, as with Barbara, I'm just puzzled by the last sentence. Doesn't seem consistent with what he says. Thanks.
Okay, I've refined my thought a little bit about this. I think the selfishness that he's referring to here in the noble person is the selfishness to be selfless visibly, to continue to do what they do in spite of criticism, in spite of there's a selfishness to being yourself.
Well,
in the face.
that's too subtle for me. I guess I'm just simple-minded, because I just read him the way he writes, and I just simply can't twist my mind in that many directions to make him read differently than what he seems to say in plain German and English. But that's my
Okay.
fault, I guess.
I would be the last person to think that you were simple-minded, Fred. So I usually discourage people doing that to themselves, but Audrey.
Well, I really am sometimes, and this is really something that I find what Barbara said very interesting, and I like it, and it makes sense to me. And then the noble-mindedness is different than just regular being noble. I think personally, and I think the definition probably does change over centuries of what's considered noble and what's considered madness and craziness. And I do think that when he talks about selfishness in this regard, that he is talking about you know, a selfness that, you're gonna do it no matter what, so that can be sound very selfish, like you know, the person that is gonna always take care of the poor students in their class, and the kids are home saying, you know, but you keep missing cooking for me. I mean, there's that level too. And so there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, and I think that society changes, and that I don't think he means selflessness. I think he means, you know, a self-centeredness that keeps you going. And I don't know if he's saying that's a good thing or not, because one thing is noble and one thing is noble-mindedness. And I like that, you know, where the regular people have that to shine. I always thought that he thought that, you know, from all this that we've read, that he's always saying that there's always these possibilities of a glimmer if when people are aware of something. And it doesn't, and then those are the people that he admires because they're authentic and true to themselves. I never think of him as saying it's only the top crust or something like that. So it's still confusing, but anyway, that's what I said.
Yeah, I think that some of the language that he uses needs, for me, I interpret it in a much kinder way than some people might do it, like when he talks about the common people or the herd. And I think that the herd is not a pejorative. I think he has a certain amount of respect for what the status quo is, but he respects a lot more the people who break the mold and maybe set things in another direction. And I'm going to make, it's a bit repetitive perhaps, but I'm not sure that for me, that there's a difference in Nietzsche's terminology here of a difference between selfishness and self-sufficiency. I think they might be analogs of each other. Oh, Jason.
I just want to re-emphasize. I believe selfishness is good for Nietzsche. Okay, and I don't think he ever say selfish is bad, and he always believe noble-mindedness is good, and which is different than noble or nobleman. Okay, which nobleman, noble people means status quo. Noble-mindedness is you have this one. Herd always bad because you are following everybody, so it's always bad. That's in my mind, and if you put this one in mind, I don't see any confusing part here because that's the good thing to do. So, you know, and good example, Lindsay's example at the beginning. Lindsay said she find out she's always right and everybody were wrong. Okay, that's a kind of noble-mindedness, and you can say selfishness, but that's good by Nietzsche. So.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, no. Okay. All right. Barbara.
Well, I'm still struggling. I'm glad Jason has it wrapped up, but I'm still thinking about how there seems to be a contradiction here based on what he used to say about the status quo versus the exceptional man. Now, the exceptional man seems the same, but he does seem to say that to become so in my translation it says, to become the advocate of the rule, which I would say would be the advocate of the status quo. That would be the ultimate form and refinement in which noble-mindedness manifests itself on earth. But what if the nobility that he's talking about and the noble-minded people are the same in this context, where he might be saying that you need the rule in order to maybe cut against it or redefine it. So you can't start from nowhere, and the noble person maybe starts from the rule itself and understands it and understands its limitations, and that's how he can exceed it. So it's almost like he's saying that the noble person needs to structure the status quo. You know, I mean, I don't know what to say. The noble person needs to structure the status quo, but he must exceed it. But he can't exceed it until he understands it, has it, and upholds it.
Yeah, you know, I think you're absolutely right. For me, you put that together really well. I had that buzzing around in my head a little earlier, and I couldn't quite get it thought out in a sentence like form. I think you're correct. I think that is what he means here. That it's the noble person doing what you said. I'll check the recording so that I can say it right next time. Christina.
Hello.
Oh,
Yeah, I just I read these sentences where it says that let me find it. The discovery of values for which no scales have been invented yet, offering sacrifices on altars that are dedicated to an unknown God. To me, it's like this person has no interest beside that of exploring unknown territories. And it reminds me a discussion I had a couple of days before with a friend, because I have my eye, I have in my vitreous body of the eye, I have the moving flies. I don't know if you had that. Well, it's something that happens to us as we get older. And I won't go into that, but this friend mentioned me Newton. Newton, it looks like he put a pin in his eye just to see how the eye will react to that, because he was an experimenter. He was very, very curious about phenomena. So so I see this noble person as somebody who is like this. So to me, it's somebody that maybe for the common people, you know, there is nothing there, but this brilliant mind will see something and will take the knowledge further. Thank you.
yeah. I think you're on to something there too. He's sort of, I think he's playing with the notions of nobility and what nobility is one way or the other, and he's defining it in his own terms, I think. And I'm going to guess that he's also including himself in that category. So Newton it might not be a bad example to come up with. And earlier I had the thought of Einstein. And because Einstein like reconfigured physics in his head. And that was certainly doing something that nobody else had done. It was looking at things in a way nobody else was looking at, and that sort of thing. And I don't know what he would think of Einstein. Anyway, okay.
So how would you classify, say, Hannibal Lecter as noble? How about
No.
Dr. Jekyll? Well, why not? Isn't that the same?
Well, because he doesn't have a courage without any desire for honors, a self-sufficiency that overflows and gives to men and things. Dr. Jekyll certainly didn't do that, and neither did Hannibal Lecter. He took from people. So I think he's observing the difference there that takes away that. Hitler is certainly not a noble human being. And I think that that distinction is, that Nietzsche is making that distinction here. Okay. Moving on. So this will be the last one for today, and we'll see how long this takes. The craving for suffering. I found this really interesting too, because it seems that what I'm taking away from this is that a lot of people would be better off looking inside themselves a lot more than they do, possibly to find out why they are distressed about things that are happening to other people instead of themselves. Like that's the first step toward exploring yourself in a way. And I kind of think that's what he's urging here, that it would be if these people who crave distress felt the strength inside themselves to benefit themselves and to do something for themselves internally, then they would also know how to create for themselves internally their very own authentic distress. I mentioned something earlier in one of Nietzsche's letters to a friend, how he felt that every time he went outside and met other people and chatted with them, and apparently he was a fairly respectable man, that his whole philosophy crumbled. And I think that's his distress, that it's not all about other people. It's about his own sense of, I am discovering things here that may be true. I'm still exploring it, that other people are just completely unaware of, because a lot of book one has just looked at life at a very deep level, and he's discovering that some words that we commonly use and accept really don't express what's actually going on inside. And so he's an explorer of his own distress of his time and his own distress or something. I'm getting a little lost here. Jason.
I think the contrast word here is distress, unhappiness. So that's the bad word for sure. And the good word is happiness. And I think the good word is happiness. Okay. So suffering, also the bad word. So his complaint, the young Europeans cannot endure their burden and themselves. So they craving for suffering and to find their suffering. Okay. A probable reason for action. Okay, so to jump to the end, the last sentence, right? They talk about they paint the distress of others on the wall. I don't know how we read on the wall. I don't see wall means your internal. I see wall as something apparent outside your goal. So young European, which cannot endure their burden, they only see the distress of others, and then they want to resolve it, or they want to follow it, or turn out that there's more suffer. So at the end, he said, "Pardon me, my friends, I have ventured to paint my happiness on the wall." So he just blank, honest, frankly, I pursue my happiness. Obvious. That's it. I think that would be end of book one. I read. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm thanks for bringing up that very last sentence. I think that what he's making a contrast between is the need for others to react to their distress. And he doesn't need anybody. He is himself self-sufficient and doesn't need. I'm just throwing that out there, Audrey.
You both confused me now, so I can't, I have to think about what you both said, because what the hell did you say? I don't know.
Yeah, even no.
But so I'll think about it and come back.
Oh, okay, Barbara.
Um, I have a footnote that says that this painting on the wall is a reversal of a German expression, don't paint the devil on the wall. And then in parentheses, it says, because by doing so, you will cause him to appear. So in other words, don't project all your mental trash outward, because then it'll become real.
Hmm.
So he's saying that they paint the unhappiness of others on the wall. In other words, take the political messages maybe and the things that they hear in the news or things that are current, and they paint them on the wall. In other words, they make that the standard by which they measure whether or not there's progress, whether or not they're happy. I mean, I know a lot of people do this when they read the headlines, right? Whether or not everything's going to hell, whatever. And so he is saying not to do that, but that somehow the distress addicts, if they had them within themselves, the power to do themselves good from within, to do something for themselves, that would be better, because he's saying they would know how to create their very own distress. But that sounds ironic to me. It sounds like he's saying they'll be able to identify what the real problems are and worry about the real things. And then at the last part, when he says he has ventured to paint his happiness on the wall, I wouldn't bet on what he means by that. He might have just liked the sound of it and put it at the end because it sounds, really good. But it doesn't, if you think about it, really fit. Although it could. If he paints his happiness on the wall, then he is projecting outward, not the things that disturb him and the things that you get all riled up about, let's say, when you hear about them, but the more internal values that make a person happy. And he's projecting that, or he wants to.
Yeah, I think the wall is just a metaphor for just getting it out there. So if you have, there's so much hand wringing on both sides over the recent election. And a lot of it is, and it can create a certain amount of distress in people who aren't distressed until they see this distress on somebody else. And so I think that's what he's identifying here with. They introduce into it the feeling of distress, and that it can spread around. I think you're right about even like publishing this book is painting his happiness on the wall, because he's getting his ideas and his notions out there into the public space. And he's not like clamoring. Well, let me think some more about that. Audrey.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to say earlier, actually, that last sentence is just, I mean, that last few sentences, where it says, they do not know what to do with themselves, dash, that therefore paint the distress of others on the wall. And so then he's saying, but I venture to paint my happiness on the wall. And so that's different right there. Distress, one is unhappiness, one is happiness. So that makes sense to me. And the way you describe what his happiness is, getting his message out, he still knows there are issues. It's not like he's saying everything's wonderful. So he's still working with his issues, but he knows they're his issues, and it's coming, and he knows the infrastructure that Barbara was basically alluding to. He knows what the root causes are, or he feels he knows what the root causes are. He doesn't have to see it on the wall and be told what to distress him about. He feels and he sees the lack of awareness, and so he's getting all his crap out, and that makes sense to me. Yeah. Yeah,
No,
so,
the-
yeah, right. So in other words, I feel that way every time I look at the headlines, so I don't look at the headlines now. But I definitely know in my gut that something is very wrong with our country, but I'm not sure what the hell it is. And the root causes are very different than than what people are painting right now. And I would like to get that out. I try to add to my texts, but that doesn't come out that way because these text people only want yes or no. Okay, thanks.
Okay, yeah, I think that's good. I think I agree with you on that. And the other thing that I was just thinking about here is that neediness is needed. So they're empty to begin with, and so they find something to be distressed about because they need to have something. We haven't really talked about that too much. And so they land on hand wringing over something. Jason.
Yeah, that's about the same thing I'm talking about. I hope I'm not criticize some religious people, but from time to time people say help the poor. I'm not saying we should not help the poor, but if you set this one as a goal, you kind of need the poor people, so you have the goal to do it, right? So how about we turn it right around, pursue happiness, okay, and then bring happiness to the world. That's another way to look at, not look at the negativity. And I check, thank you, Barbara, talking about the saying, the paint the devil on the wall. You said that's a German saying?
It says
Barbara?
in my footnote, it's a German expression,
Okay.
don't paint the devil on the
Okay,
wall.
so I checked.
Please
I
don't
think
forget
that's
that.
very, very correct because I'm not sure it's German or not, but basically it said don't have the negative review in the world. Okay, so he as a German, he must know this saying. So he just say, paint my happiness on the wall instead of devil on the wall. So
Yeah. Brad.
It seems what comes to mind here is that he's suggesting that a spur to action is to invent false, fictitious, exaggerated emergencies. It brings to mind that everything these days has to be a crisis. You know, that if we have a temporary shortage of toilet paper, say, that's a crisis that needs a solution from all sorts of agencies and people and news media and everything else. Everything turns into a crisis, it seems that, and that's our spur to action. It specifically talks about the clamor of politicians, you know, inventing crises to push their various programs forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the toilet paper shortage is the correct thing to describe as not a crisis.
Good point.
But I get your point. I'm sure everybody else does too. I just thought I'd have a little fun with that. Okay, so we're at the end of book one, and we'll start book two in 2 weeks. Book one strikes me, and I sort of said that, we were going to do a little kind of, were there any themes that came through or anything? And I'm deliberately thinking a lot more about some of these things that he's bringing up than I did before. And I think part of what my takeaway is that at some level, the preservation of the species is built in, but it's also an important thing that deserves a certain amount of respect. And that there are higher people and lower people. And that a lot of the things that we think we know, we really may not know. Because there was a certain amount of experimentation going on here, I think, with trying to play with words and show that maybe the opposite is actually at the bottom of this word, that like love and avarice. between the two, and I know we wrestled over that one. So that's sort of what I'm taking away at this point. I mean, there's a lot more as well, but I think that these are opening themes that will be developed more later. And I know that preservation of the species thing popped up 2 or 3 different times. And he finds a lot of the roots of human behavior in the herd, in the preservation of the species, the instinct. And I know that's right, we had a really interesting conversation about that. I'm just going to say that straightforwardly, Jason.
So, but first, I'm a question about does Nietzsche publish book by book, or is all at once?
It was book 1 through 4 was published in 1882 as a piece. None of it was
Oh,
published.
okay.
Book 5 was added in 1887, I think, and the preface. We're
Okay.
going to skip book 5 until we get to 1887 after Zarathustra. So we're
Okay,
going
so book 5 is after Zarathustra. Okay, so thank you for that. But I try to figure out what's the main theme on book 1. I don't find anything. I just find all kinds of things there. So I probably can have a better idea after we finish to book 4. And I will say, oh, book 1 says something, book 2 says something, book 3. But at this moment, it's not my first time reading this text, but that's the first time reading in this detail. So I really have no idea, but I like to hear how other people talk about this. Yeah.
It may be mistaken on me too, but I don't think it is. I realize there's so many things are scattered that it's really hard to say, oh, this is what book 1 is about, because it seems to be about a lot of things. But I think that he's offering challenges to the conventional ways that we think of just about everything. He just doesn't have room in book 1 to put everything in, but he's got the rest of the book and his other stuff. But this is, and it's a continuation of doing philosophy and psychology in an unconventional way. And it's getting us used to, if we haven't read any of his previous stuff, the style. So now we're familiar with the style. And maybe looking forward, I think we all are, to more of this, Barbara.
Well, this is a process question. If we want to sign up for next time, do we not sign up for next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after? And we have to sign up. So we have to wait a week to sign up for the Wednesday after next?
Yeah, what
Is
I'm
that-
going to do is I'm going to cancel next week's meetup. So it won't be on the calendar anymore. And I will announce the week after and open it for RSVPs.
Oh,
So
okay, so,
right after we're done here, I'll do that.
okay,
and-
great, because I might forget. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I don't want to forget.
yeah. I might forget too. Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, I think it's in the nature of this book as aphorisms, as these little snippets, that it's difficult to think of a common theme. If there is a theme, such as it is, it might be to rethink everything that you just took for granted.
Yeah.
And look at it in this alternative way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's a really good a summary of kind of not what it's about, but what is at stake, what is happening here. Yeah, I agree with you completely. Well,
I think I agree too. Happy
Oh.
Thanksgiving, everybody. I'm going.
yeah, have a happy holiday, and I'll see you in 2
I'm
weeks.
well, no, I won't be here because I have a doctor's appointment that I can't change, so.
Good luck with
But
that.
I'll read the first couple of ones I started book 2
Oh.
already. So.
Yeah, by all means, by all means. This, I only read the first two and I am really excited to get into book two.
Yeah, well, the 57 actually follows the one we just did pretty well. It's just another variation
Yeah,
of, so anyway, all
Yeah.
right.
well, I
Yeah,
think that's,
let me share what I learned. Okay, so I think that this experience, book one, I learned how to read Nietzsche. Okay, so I think so. I excited about I use my new method to read Nietzsche. So I think that's another main topic on the book one. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm still learning, so I figure that by the time I finish it, I will learn how to read it.
but Fred, just specific for Fred, I think we read the Michel de Montaigne together, and then I think it's really helped. So
yeah. No, I'm just gonna say that, I've discovered that reading it with other people is a lot more useful than just reading it by myself and scratching my head half the time. So thank you so much for being regulars here. I really appreciate your presence, genuinely do. And this is just one of my favorite hours of the whole week. So see you, and I will post it within 5 minutes. I'll have the next one for 2 weeks posted. And you know, like that. So Audrey, just check the calendar. Do you know how to check the calendar?
Me? Yeah, of course. I'm noble-minded. I know how to do all that stuff.
Ah, gee.
I belong to a women's group and like nobody knows where the calendar is. It is so hard to get any of this accomplished. So that's why I threw that out. I forgot that I'm in the philosophy group here where every,
Yeah, we have calendars, yeah. I could even look at the sun and figure out the time.
all right.
Sort of.
It won't be available for RSVPs for you for the next one you'll be coming to until the week before, 2 weeks from now. Because well, I'll
When you
open it.
talk like that, no wonder the people didn't understand you where the calendar is. That I didn't, that doesn't make sense.
Okay, all right. Christina, I'm glad
Thanks,
you're
Andy.
recruiting, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. All right.
Okay.
Bye.